Hello and welcome to Summer Improvement for Overwatch. We're going to be reviewing a concept today, cover usage. So previously, for the people who haven't watched the other videos, we've been talking a lot about taking duels and how to get individual value, and just how to be more of a threat in a fight. Specifically, we focused a lot on Tracer, also Pachimari on the wall, that's cute. Yeah, so today we're going to talk a lot about cover usage and how it varies from the different archetypes of characters, and just in general how you should use cover correctly. So there's some obvious use cases for cover, which is like, okay, the enemy team has range damage, you want to stand behind the corner and not take damage, right? But obviously at some point you're going to have to go for shots of your own. So we're going to do a bit of a demonstration on like how to use cover. So I've kind of come up with like one situation to kind of get us going. So if you don't mind, Doom, standing over there. So part of cover is not just taking cover of against like a dangerous threat, but it's also it's kind of using the doorways and the corners in a way that allows you to kind of isolate targets as well is like a really big part of it. So like say the entire enemy team is standing in this area, right? If I want to shoot just this cast, then what I can do is I can use this corner to play it tight so that I'm only barely peeking like this to go for damage, where I don't have to peek the rest of the team. Because if I just stood here and you went for the same thing, I'd be getting shot back from the entire enemy team, right? So that's like one really big example of like how to use cover to sort of maximize effectiveness, and especially if you can kind of say this wasn't a cast, say this was like a Kiriko or a Moira, right? Being able to LOS the rest of the team, the Moira doesn't even have a range threat at this range, right? So if I can shoot, if I can get an angle on this Moira and shoot her for free while LOSing the rest of the team, that's gonna be basically free value for me. So that's like one big example to think about. So kind of going back, previously I've discussed with my players some of the three fundamental archetypes of characters in the game, and the three fundamental playstyles especially, which is poke, brawl, and dive. Real quick, Doom, do you mind giving a brief explanation, or slightly flammable as well if you'd like?
Poke is often described as the long-range heroes, so your Sigmas, your Widowmakers, your Ashes. Really just, there's a lot of characters that can poke that are not considered poke, but we're not going to get into that.
Yeah.
Brawl is more like rushing things down, so like your Ryan, your Lucio.
Yeah, and big bursts of cooldowns and value, right? In your face, yeah. Closer range.
Dive is very similar, but it's just like it's a lot more isolating someone who's like isolated, like going on them really quickly, stabilizing, getting out, or just going in and then getting out immediately after, or just really just going fast. Yeah. On one person.
And specifically as well, Dive really likes to control map space. That's a really big important part because with the mobility, you kind of want to clamp down and control the entire map so that you can control the angles, right? Ultimately, this entire game is about angles, which is partially like, kind of defines like how you're going to play cover as well. So a big question of how to play cover comes down to what interaction / matchup are you looking at in the current moment, right? Like, how do you want to take a fight given the enemy team comp and the enemy characters, right? So like, for example, the example that I gave earlier against the Moira, that would be example of like a brawlier character, so Moira who wants to be kind of closer with healing her team, like being in front of your face. But if I have the opportunity to shoot her from a distance, I don't even need cover per se, right? I don't need cover from her specifically, and I can use the cover to like block her team. But I can actually kind of stand out in the open. Here, let me actually get a better position. So like, as the soldier, if there's like a Rhine who's like the epitome of brawl, who's just holding shield and just standing there, I'm perfectly happy to shoot over and over, just to whittle down the resources because it's a free trade for me, right? So I don't necessarily have to use cover in that situation. In fact, I don't necessarily, depending on the enemy comp, of course, have to play like that far back, which is still good. But you can kind of play more aggressively in the open in order to get an angle that forces them to like walk at you. And the less cover that you kind of force the enemy to have, the better in terms of your angle. So let's see. Any questions so far, or anything you guys want to mention while I think about where to take it?
I'm sure you're gonna get to it, but also keep in mind who is with that ride. So if like there's a Cassie with that ride, you gotta be more careful.
Yes. Yeah. But at the same time, the same fundamentals apply, where often if there's a Rhine, you can just LOS the cast, like I was saying before, and just shoot the Rhine like this, right? So there is still that threat, but it's about isolating the targets and the good trades for you using cover. So that's poke into brawl is very simple to understand in that sense, where as the soldier I just have a lot of opportunity to get damage off at range. Now when it gets difficult is when there's characters with mobility, because the whole point of mobility is that it kind of breaks down your ability to get a sightline. Now, actually, if you don't mind killing me real quick so I can kind of demonstrate this. Boink. So I'm going to go Tracer to kind of demonstrate how characters with mobility can break this, because obviously the pokier characters like Ashe, Widow, Soldier, as just some examples of pokier characters, would like to force out resources, like force out recall, so on and so forth, by getting a shot off. But there's a significant advantage that the mobility characters has, which is using the mobility to go from sightline to sightline, utilizing cover of their own in order to get resources, stabilize in the space, right? And utilize the fact that they can rotate faster in order to potentially get an engagement down. Because now this is kind of a bad example, because like covering this distance is actually quite difficult. You might have to do some flank like this where you kind of play under, right? But even then you can kind of get stuffed. But the goal of the mobility characters is to get close, or at least be able to trade favorably to these characters that are set up on the power positions, using the mobility to like take cover and to kind of weave LOS, right? And oftentimes, like as the mobility character kind of takes these angles, the enemy team will know where you're coming from. But even if they know, it doesn't change the fact that with the mobility you're gonna have the dynamics to kind of go from cover to cover, right? And so as Tracer, I don't even have to do anything. I can just like wait for pressure from my team, and if I like see you're gonna turn the corner, I can blink back again, right? You'll never be able to clear me from this angle if I don't force myself out. Especially because A, there's a mini here. B, I have all these blinks. Like as long as I'm playing safe, I should be okay, right? And then it's all about, okay, now I'm here. They're kind of looking at me. I'm not committing. Then my Winston jumps from the other angle, and that's where like. That's why it's such a struggle for poke to deal with dive, is because when dive properly takes the map space like wide around the entire map, then even if they have one good angle, there's usually some sort of angle that another character can take that will pin you down on that location. Like this position is really good at covering this whole space, but once I'm Tracer and I manage to get here, I can harass, force you to turn around, hold the cover, and then the moment you look away, I can harass again like this, right? Or I can even go for something like that, right? And then once you turn around to look at me, that's when this entire open space, like I say I have a Winston over here, say you're turning the other direction, as Winston this is a free jump for me now because there's no pressure, right? And that's kind of that comes down to the mobility characters properly using the cover in order to take that space though. As the mobility characters, you need to think, okay, what is their power position? Where can they rotate generally? And how do I counter that with pathing? And pathing is like thinking to yourself, okay, which parts of the map are safest for me to kind of approach them, right? And there's a lot of ways that you can kind of get creative with your movement. Like, for example, what I just showed you here, like, even if they know you're coming up here, you can, like, go for, oh, messed it up. You can go for, like, we'll say, one blink here, you see that? I'm already in cover, and then I can do, like, 2 more blinks here, and you have the option to kind of dictate where you need to go, depending on, as you kind of peek for half a second, you'll get an idea of, like, is their attention turned on you, right? And cover usage in general, it comes down to, like, whenever you peek, you need to be aware if someone is, like, pinning you down with, like, not necessarily, like, shooting at you, but even just looking at you, right? Because when the crosshair is placed like this, if I turn the corner, I can potentially get a lot of damage chunked. So, like, another thing is, when you're using cover as a mobility character, sometimes you want to use one blink just to break the choke. Because if they know I'm right here, then they can lie. If you don't mind just, like, going in that corner and just kind of peeking. If I say I'm the cast in this situation, I can just pre-fire on the corner as I, like, watch the health bar, like, move across, right? But if you go for, like, a roll through the choke, it's significantly harder for me to, like, get a headshot, per se. Or for me to just pre-fire you. So, mobility characters also really need to use cover. And then, on top of that, the fundamental that I talked about earlier, where, like, I'm playing this corner and I want to LOS from a range, certain targets when I'm going for an engagement. The same thing is also true when you're playing mobility characters. So, like, if, say, the cast is right here, and, I don't know, maybe, we'll just say they have, like, a Sojourn right here. I can go for one blink here, and potentially LOS this Sojourn while taking this duel, right? And I can, you know, the better you are, there's, like, a really deep and rich, what's the word? Skill expression to this part, where you can, like, say the Sojourn starts to walk in, or you hear her slide towards me. Once I hear her slide towards me, then I blink the other direction, forcing her to be, again, out of position while I'm taking this duel. Now, obviously, taking that close of a duel with the cast is a little bit of a bad example, because he's just kind of, he might, like, just destroy me, but that's just an example, right? And, like, say their BAP is just over here. I don't want to be taking the fight right here. I want to be right here, because now I'm LOSing one person while I take this duel. Or, you know, then you have the option to say, oh, well, I'm going to leave the cast and take the duel with this BAP. And getting comfortable with using your movement to weave in and out of cover between enemy team is really important. Yeah. Any questions or thoughts so far on that?
No.
Sounds great. Okay. Doing a bit of thinking right now. Hold up. So, often it is said that in general there's a sort of circle of counters to poke, dive, brawl, which is dive beats poke, and for a lot of the reasons we kind of discussed, where you can kind of play LOS really well. Poke beats brawl because standing in this long open LOS, if I can just shoot you while you're walking towards me, you're very slow, and I get a lot of opportunity to burn your resources, right? Because you don't have the ability to, like, use close cover and to run me down. And then in general, it's also said that brawl beats dive, because dive will take the entire map space away from brawl, but brawl tends to have very high impact, close range burst value, which means even if you get the map space, you can't necessarily guarantee that even when you get the opportunity to, like, get close, that you won't get, like, a flash or what is it, magnetic grenade hindered in headshot, right? So that's like a very loose baseline, and oftentimes what counters what actually depends a lot on map geometry, because yes, poke will beat out brawl 9 times out of 10, but if the Ashe is standing right here, and the Ryan and the Lucio are standing right here, and they can speed out and swing on the Ashe, well, who's countering who, right? So it comes down to playing the map correctly and just the specific geometry of what you're allowed to get away with. Yeah, so there's a lot more to be said about dynamics of like Pokeball Dive is not necessarily a comp you play, but a play style within a comp. So like even if you're like on Winston, you might be able to play Pokier, which is depending on your DPS and such. But in general, that's how the interactions work, and that's kind of how you want to play cover, because cover is also the map geometry, right? So like as the Brawl team, yeah, this is where we finally talk about Brawl a little more. So like Brawl using cover, whenever they have the opportunity to play inside of a safe location where they can stabilize resources without getting like angled, that is generally where Brawl is going to be really, really good. So think a really good example would be like King's Row in general it's a decently brawly map, right? A lot of people will run like Ramattra Orion if they can. And the big reason for that is like, especially for second point, for example, there's not a lot of flanks. It's very linear, and the main choke tends to be very tight. So like the Ryan holding shield down main tends to cover all of the angles, right? Yeah, so angles in this game are king. If there's no angles to like take care of, then that's when Brawl tends to be very good. And so that just means that like their flanks need to have cover. So typically like a really good example of like when Brawl is like pretty safe is when they're inside of a room. And this is kind of likened to like a quote unquote bunker playstyle. But in actuality, like these safe like havens are really important for getting resources back when you spend big cooldowns, because you don't have to spend resources in order to maintain the location, because you can like swing a Rhine hammer at the choke. Yeah. But in general, Brawl kind of sucks. Other than, I guess, it's like even though you're playing Ramattra, who can like run you down, he's got the option to play long range with his shield and his left click, and most of the time people are playing like Sojourn Tracer, which is like a pokier dive anyway. Yeah. So those are kind of the fundamentals of the playstyles. Especially in mirrors, you're going to be switching between them a lot, just kind of reading the situation and saying, okay, this Cassidy, he's really good at poking me down as Tracer, right? So I kind of have to play with attention or bait cooldowns, right? But other than that, that's kind of the basic fundamentals of cover usage. Anything you think I'm missing? But yeah, okay. So yeah, to summarize, how you play cover is going to depend somewhat on the situation that you're in, and being able to read like, okay, what is the best way to play the cover in this current situation, and how am I going to play cover to get value? Sometimes as Tracer, you just want to hold space, and you don't necessarily want to push. And this, you could argue that Tracer's almost playing Brawly, right? Just saying, I'm going to hold this corner, and I'm going to use all my resources to, like, just control this area, right? As opposed to having to go for an aggressive play on the backline. Yeah, we've been talking a lot about Tracer, by the way, in the other videos. So, because I think Tracer has to learn all those three fundamental playstyles in order to like really be played effectively. Because yes, she has a lot of mobility, and she can be used to go aggressively into the back line, but she can also be used to trade on front line. She can be used to hold a flank. She can be used to poke you down and willow you down slowly from an angle, right? Like, if there's a Ramattra here and he's just not looking at me, I'm almost a poke character just sitting here whittling him down over and over, right? So long as I'm aware of what can threaten me when I'm pressuring. Because then suddenly I see the cast turn towards me, then I'm like, okay, I can either like back up, wait, or even just go do something else. And the cast is sitting there waiting for me, and then I notice he's like shooting someone over here, then I blink back, shoot him again, he turns, and then I go do something else, right? Playing with attention and using cover so that you get to choose when you're being aggressive is really important. Yeah. So that's kind of the macro sense and the micro sense of how to take advantage. So there's another actual small thing. Let me get on cast real quick. Actually, yeah, just kill me real quick. Nice. Another thing for poke characters. So now let's actually talk a bit about poke v poke and just some micro specifics on how to take less damage when you can. So as poke, whenever you don't have a threat that is gonna like have high mobility, like engage, like if there's not a tracer, oftentimes that means as the poke character you can take wider angles without getting punished, and that means in this game you can get a lot more aggressive on wide angles, depending on the resources you have. So like if you have heals that can reach you, like you definitely can take that flank, or if there's a mega that you have, or depending on the range and the angle, right? But when you are playing on your own, you have to kind of be aware of what your resources are, because you don't want to get. What I don't want the situation to happen is I peek 4 people, I get headshot, and I immediately have to roll away, and then I like don't get any value for like the next 5 to 10 seconds. Now, granted, it's not as bad if you don't die, because just do a headshot on me. That's fine. I can potentially take the corner and use the new heal passive to just wait, and then I can because I was playing cover and I was playing safe distance, I can peek again and wait to and try and get some more aggressive value. On top of, in a situation like this as well, there's a mega here, so like you just hit me in the head. I can just walk to this mega, walk back, and then just start pressuring again. Let's see. Also, another thing is on a much more micro sense, just stand there. If I want to take a duel with like an individual person, especially if I'm a character like Cass, where take notice of the rhythm of the shot real quick. See that? This is kind of a bad example of the corner. Can you like walk that on the bridge a little more? Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. So as Cass, you can kind of peek to the rhythm of your shots potentially sometimes, and it can be a little more difficult, especially if the enemy is doing the same thing, as you can see. But being able to kind of time your peek so that you just barely get a shot off, that you're like only peeking for a frame, is it's a really great way to minimize the risk that you're taking while kind of maximizing your output. So that's another micro for like using cover. Let's see. Another part of using cover, some characters in the game have splash or things that can just hit you from around the corner, so you kind of have to have an intuitive understanding. Yeah, like Nade, for example, can just hit, like, grab you from around the corner, right? But another example is like Soldier Rocket. If I'm standing right here and a Soldier Rocket gets shot right here, then I will still potentially get splashed, and that may not be the end of the world, but it's just something to be aware of, that you may not want to take trash damage for no reason. Character like Farah is really a good example of that.
I'd like to say that ultimates break the game, sir.
Yes, ults do break the game. Do you have anything specific in your mind that you're thinking of?
Sigma, you want to, like, you know, if you want to play back, Flux can kind of enable you to get in people's faces.
Yes. That's more on like the poke, brawl, dive fundamentals and less about cover. But I do agree that ults can kind of break how you take and approach a fight, especially as a team in like a macro sense and an individual sense.
Along the same thinking as Sigma, if you want, you can stop LOSing him and start LOSing where you think his circle is gonna be, because that's how it works.
Yeah, it's well, it's not even an LOS thing anymore. It's like,
is it not? Am I stupid?
Yeah, like you, even if you don't have LOS to the circle, it'll still grab you.
That stinks.
Yeah, that's how it used to work. So like say Sigma like put a flux right here. It used to be that I would not get grabbed here, but now I will. So it's like you used to be able to like properly use cover in order to like minimize your risk against flux. Now that's like much less a thing. Yeah, that's the fundamentals. It gets applied to like different ults, different situations, and the answers are always going to be slightly different. Uh, but you know, that's just the basics. That's how you start out with, and if you master that in like the neutral, then you'll get a lot of value. Other than that, I can't think too much of what else to say at the current moment. Just start. If you want to try to apply this in your own gameplay, try to think about the character that you play, and try to. Yeah, ultimately, it comes down to trading favorably in this entire game. Like as Baptiste, you want to be able to heal and damage without getting immortality forced, right? Because immortality is like a 30-second cooldown. You don't want it forced. You don't want to get used. But if you can force something out of the enemy team just by shooting and keeping your team up, that's good. So like thinking about, oh, in this situation, apparently the cast had LOS on me and I took half my HP and I got pinned. Why did I not know that cast was there? Right? So like there's this element of awareness of keeping track of what your threats are and at what range, and realizing like not only when they're a threat but when they can be a threat, and kind of preemptively either taking cover, stopping them from taking that corner, so on and so forth. Like those are just a couple things to think about. Other than that, yes. Okay. There's another thing I could think of. So there's another like really big micro thing about, for example, poke versus poke. So we talked a little bit about when you're taking an angle, it kind of matters whether or not the enemy team has attention on you, because if I peek this corner, I can potentially get pre-fired, or I can pre-fire them, right? So a really good way to, we'll say, outplay them, say like I go for this shot, right? A good way to outplay them, just placing their crosshair on the corner and just shooting me, right, is say I peek once, I drop, peek again, drop, peek, roll to the corner, peek again. So it's utilizing the space around you to kind of mix up where you're approaching, because often when I'm peeking cover like this, I'm actually like, I'm only peeking for like half a second, and I'm like using my jump here in this example to like make it significantly harder to get shot at, and I'm kind of moving around in unpredictable ways to make it as hard as possible, so that he's in the, notice how Doom is in the open here, so it's a lot harder unless he like commits roll to like get to cover, whereas I can kind of choose like, oh, headshot, you know, and so dealing with that sort of thing on the enemy team, like once you know that it's a thing, is like it makes it significantly harder to deal with it. And like on a high ground like this, I can use crouch to lower my hitbox to say I get a shot, that sort of thing. Like obviously I'm missing, but that's just the concept, right? And of course it's gonna make your shots a little harder to hit, but I promise you, if you do this, you will win out trades significantly more against like other DPS, other players, and you'll just win forehead. Other than that, yeah, I think that was the last like real big thing to talk about. And in that concept alone, like if you couldn't tell from how I was like playing around that bridge, there are oftentimes, especially when it comes to weird geometry around you, a lot of ways that you can play around that and get creative with it. And that's partially why mobility is so strong, is because like for example, tracer blink, I can peek you for half a second and then blink around the corner to say, hey, I may have only done like 30-40 damage to you, but you did 0 to me. And if you do that 3 or 4 times with 3 or 4 blinks, then you're still gonna have the potential to like whittle someone down to half HP, and then you can like go for a full engage as tracer, right? Or look at this too. There's also the concept of like, if you can, sometimes you can shoot someone without them shooting you back, and that comes down to like, there's just like weird situations and weird geometry where like, can you walk over there for me? I think that this would be a good example. It's not all the time, just over there. So like, you can't see me, or you might only be able to see my feet, right? But I can kind of see you, and I can still shoot your legs. So sometimes you can kind of play around with that. It's a very niche thing, but the more niche things you can take advantage of, the better, right? Or like, if I have a high ground above someone, then I naturally have the ability to like, hey, I have this high burst option with Rocket. let me peek and shoot that out, and then just go back to the cover, wait a couple seconds. Yeah. So there's a lot to think about. That I think will do it for today. Nice 30-minute video. Keep it at least a little simple. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, anything you realized, so on and so forth, from anyone in the audience?
I do not.
I've forgotten how Sigma works.
You've forgotten how Sigma works?
Well, they just changed that like yesterday, I think.
Yeah, it was like a week ago, yeah. Yeah. I'll go ahead and stop the recording then. Thank you guys for coming. I like to keep it decently short and sweet, but also informational. I might go more into Poke Brawl Dive, we'll see, depending on what makes sense. I'll just be thinking about it over the next week. But definitely try to be thinking about how to use cover to win duels favorably. And this is kind of where like playing against better players can help too, because better players will kind of naturally and intuitively use cover better. And so when you're kind of looking for it, you'll realize, oh my gosh, it was so hard to take this fight with this guy because he was just playing cover so well. And he was playing with my attention and realizing every single time that I wasn't looking at him, he was shooting at me, right? And that's a really annoying thing to deal with, especially against a tracer, right? Yeah. But thank you guys for watching. I'll be back next week with another concept.